Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Well, this is the next to the last one for this particular series for this time period, so I'll probably be making the other one before the end of the week, so be sure to look out for that one there. The reason why I picked this one here was because it reminded me, it's no doubt, it's almost 100% similar to a previous cryptid that I talked about that I found so fascinating. That one was called the Buranjur, which was apparently the last living T-Rex somewhere in Australia. Well, apparently he's not the last living T-Rex. Apparently there's a similar cousin of his somewhere in this world as well. Now, whether this particular cryptid is still out there is unknown because the dates I'm about to talk about are a little bit far back. And so if this particular cryptid is still out there, then unfortunately there's no more recent sightings associated with it. But with regards to this cryptid, again, it's very, very similar to Buranjur, so check out that Buranjur video when you have a chance too, because it remains one of my highest rated ones out there, one of the highest viewed ones as well. So a lot of people like that one, and so that's why I picked this one, because I don't really talk about, again, much involving cryptids like dinosaurs, like sea monsters, or dinosaurs like anything involving the common sighting of, say, pterosaur or anything like that. But I really, really love it when it involves something like a large beast, like a T-Rex like beast. So in any case, this cryptid is called, it has a unique name actually. You would think that, but considering that it has distinction of being closely resembled to the T-Rex, that it would have a cooler sounding name, but it doesn't. It's called the Partridge Creek Monster. Apparently it's another cryptid that's named after the location that it's found. And so with regards to this cryptid, again, the reason why it's so fascinating is because it bears so much resemblance to the encounters that people have had similar to the Buranjur, but this is all happening on the borders of Canada and Alaska. You would have to go towards the Yukon territory, so it's very, very cold up there, which again makes it so much different than anything else, because if this is truly, let's say, a living dinosaur, then this dinosaur is currently living in a very cold area, which goes against anything as far as common knowledge or science associated with dinosaurs, who are essentially considered, in some cases, there's still debate on that, but considered in most cases to be cold-blooded. And so for them to exist in something like this territory, for this particular Partridge Creek Monster to exist there in the frigid cold, it would have to be warm-blooded. So again, very, very fascinating discussion on that part. So again, this dinosaur, you'll see a picture of it here, bears a very close resemblance to the T-Rex. It is not a T-Rex though. Its official classification is, I just saw it here, it's a pretty long name on there. I think it's called a Ceratosaurus, Ceratosaurus nasicornis. So again, that's the official name, the official title of it. Again, it bears much resemblance to a Tyrannosaurus Rex, barring the actual most distinctive feature of it, which is a large protrusion associated with its snout. This is a very important piece because the people that discovered this creature up there in the Canada-Alaska area noticed this distinctive protrusion. So that's what separates this and classifies this as this particular subspecies of dinosaur as opposed to the T-Rex, because the reports that were associated with the encounter, everybody mentioned that this particular bone-like intrusion, like whatever it was that was sticking out, this is what most people refer to. Very, very fascinating stuff. So again, you have to go back a little while, as I was mentioning earlier. No reports anywhere in the 21st century. No reports in the late to the mid 20th century. You have to go all the way back to 1908 to even hear what the first report is. And unfortunately, 1908. It's the early 1900s on there, because apparently there's two reports associated with, one in 1903 and then one in around 1907, 1908. So you have to again consider that even if this dinosaur is still living out there right now, you would have to have a species of dinosaur that is either into, let's say, a separate generation from this encounter in the 1900s, because dinosaurs, by all intents and purposes, weren't considered to really live a long time. But considering that this is a living dinosaur that has passed the millions of years of extinction that its other relatives have had, then apparently there's got to be, let's say, a family of these dinosaurs out there in order for them to essentially survive one generation after another. So no recent sightings. So hopefully this generation, whatever family of whatever these dinosaurs are or were in the Alaska area, hopefully they're still there right now. So if anybody knows any stories on there, share them below. But unfortunately, again, the latest dates that I could find is somewhere around the 1907-1908 date. So the first encounter again happened around 1903, and it had to do with several people. There was a traveler at that time, a French traveler by the name of Georges Dupuy. D-U-P-U-I, Dupuy, I hope I'm saying that right. He was apparently a banker from San Francisco, and he had a friend of his named James Lewis Butler, and another friend of his named Tom Leemore, and they all went on an expedition of sorts up and around that area to go hunting. It's quite common back then, and still quite common now, to just eventually take these little excursions up into the wilderness, grab some rifles, grab some friends, and then essentially try to hunt some game and either eat the game or make trophies out of the game or even make some decorative wear out of it. Who knows? It's just another excuse, in other words, for them to get together and then have a good time and go out towards the wilderness for this. And as they were doing their usual thing when it came to hunting, they apparently traveled about 100 miles east of Dawson City. And when they were there, they noticed that there were some caribou, some deer, in and around that area. And as they were there were some deer there, but there were also some moose in and around the area too. And so they decided to pick on the moose to essentially hunt down. And this is where it gets kind of fascinating, and this is why I picked this story again, because it almost reads like a Jurassic Park type discovery. I mean, this is almost something straight out of a screenplay. So it says here, and going to my research, so they had their sights on one particular moose, and then, quote unquote, this moose raised its head as if it had heard something unexpected in the vicinity. And then, just as it did, a second member of the trio of moose, because apparently there were a group of them there, emitted a very large, loud bellow of alarm. And this sent all of them fleeing southwards, which was away from their direction, with great speed. So they noticed something that spooked them. Now these moose were apparently about 7 feet tall at the shoulder, so they were not tiny moose. They were not those that could be easily spooked, and they were not spooked by the hunters themselves. Whether they had noticed this trio of hunters or not is unknown at this point, but presumably not, because they were not paying attention to it at the time that the hunters were placing their sights on them, their rifle sights on them. But whatever they did notice was in the opposite direction, and that was when they something spooked them so much that one of them screeched like a loud bellow of warning, and then they all fled as quickly as can, as if their life depended on them. And so the hunters, the trio of them, whenever they decided to try to inspect, because they didn't sense anything, they didn't hear anything, and which just happens a lot of times because animals, because of their instinctive reflexes and their bodily characteristics, they have far more senses than, in most cases, than humans do. They sensed it, but the hunters did not. But they were interested in seeing what spooked these particular trio of moose, and so they went to that spot where they believed that the moose saw something or heard something in that direction. And when they went, that's when they saw some stuff that was very, very unique. Apparently, this thing that was there was no longer there, but what they saw was the remnants of this thing so recently. In other words, it was there just a couple of minutes before, but now it was no longer there. It was apparently tracking the moose, just like the hunters were tracking the moose as well. This is what they saw. Apparently they saw a dentation in the ground as if something was resting there. Almost not resting like in a sleeping position, but resting in more along the lines of a hunting position, like in a crouching position. Whatever this thing was large enough so that its belly had pushed the area there, which was a little bit muddy, down, and it created a massive indentation of about 30 feet long. And apparently it was 30 feet long, about 12 feet wide, and this thing was so heavy that it was 2 feet deep as well. They also saw that there was some clear footprints associated with this crouch, and these footprints each measured about 2.5 feet across. And then the way that the footprints were separated from each other, they were about 5 feet from toe to toe. In other words, the space between them was about 5 feet in length on there. So, and then also on top of that, these footprints were so clear that they could also notice that there were claws associated with each footprint that were about a foot long each as well. So clearly now these hunters didn't realize it, but at the same time that they were hunting these moose, this thing, whatever it was, this Partridge Creek Monster, was hunting the moose as well, and had just left. Thankfully had just left, and so the hunters were obviously a little perplexed, confused, probably even fearful at what they discovered. Something that was so large that again it could create a massive indentation in that muddy banky area of sorts that was 30 feet long, and then also again 2 feet deep. That is huge. That is gigantic. If I were in that situation and I saw something like that, and I realized using my own hunter skills at the time that this was a fresh indentation and not something that was there let's say dried up over several weeks, and instead was just completely fresh as of the moment, that's when I would call it quits, and then that's when I would leave the area immediately. But apparently these hunters, they decided that they wanted to still continue, and so they this time they went together. They started following the tracks because they wanted to see, I guess curiosity got the better of them, and they wanted to see the tracks that led to that indentation, because they wanted to see like where or led from that indentation, because they wanted to see where this thing went. Again, that's a lot of bravado, because if it were in my situation, I would again call it quits, but these guys are particularly I guess much more curious about than fearful, and so they tracked this thing as it was tracking the moose, and they noticed that it went to a Partridge Creek near the area. They tracked it for actually several miles, and that's when it went to a creek-like area, but the tracks simply came to an end. And the only thing that they could realize on this, because the way that Partridge Creek is set up there, was that the Partridge Creek stopped, and then there was a space towards the bottom. Like, in other words, it wasn't like towards a creek, like a creek with water, right across it that you could just walk across. No, it's more like a cliff of some sort, like a little mini cliff. And so what they realized is that the track stopped there, but they couldn't get across the creek to the other end because of the little mini cliff there. But the track stopped, but they didn't go anywhere else. So the only thing they could surmise was that whatever this thing was, this Partridge Creek Monster, actually leapt the entire cliff itself, and then continued its tracking or continued its hunt on the other side. So that's when they didn't call it quits per se 100%, but they stopped at least that time because they know they couldn't follow it at that point. So in any case, these men, the trio of men, they were still kind of interested in seeing what this thing was. So they tried another day of searching this creature. No more were they hunting anymore for actual like caribou or anything involving moose. Instead, they were actually trying to find this particular creature. They spent an extra day doing this, but nothing came up. And so it was then on the third day that apparently they did come across it, and when they did, it was a sight to behold. And again, this is stuff that's associated with almost like a Jurassic Park movie. So here's how it went on there. So they were actually establishing camp on top of a rocky ravine, is how the research says. And as they were doing so, and again, they were with the full intention of that day of trying to have this thing hunted down, at least to try to catch it and to try to see what it was. They were there in the camp when all of a sudden there was a quote-unquote hideous roar that broke the Arctic silence. And so whenever they heard this gigantic roar, can you imagine again what that would be like? Imagine like a Jurassic Park T-Rex type roar in the distance. They realized it was actually a lot closer than what they thought it would be. And so they immediately grabbed their rifles, and whenever they started looking around the area, near and around their area, they actually saw something was apparently a quote-unquote heart-stopping sight. So apparently this thing, in an ironic way, they were trying to hunt it, and it was trying to hunt them, and it found them. It found them at their camp. And so here it was actually approaching them. They said, and this was about 200 paces away, whatever estimation that is, if anyone knows exactly how long that is, 200 paces away, this thing found them. And this is what they described it. They said it was black in color, it was at least 50 feet long, and it was estimated to weigh about 40 tons. And the way that their particular camp was set up, they camped on top of not on top of a mountain, but it was on a slopey area. So in other words, in order to get to their camp, you would always have to be going upwards. Well, this thing was actually climbing upwards straight towards them, and the way it was climbing up, it knew like it was heading towards them. In other words, maybe it was curious at them at the fact that it was tracking them and they were tracking it, and vice versa. And so when it was near and by their area, that's when it paused and it stopped. And it did so for about 10 minutes. There was this face-off of sorts between the Partridge Creek Monster and these trio of hunters. And when they were able, for 10 minutes, they were able to get a really, really close look at it. So again, it was about 50 feet long. They described it weighing about 40 tons. It was black in color, which is unique. Every estimation, again, associated with dinosaurs and their coloring tends to be more camouflage related, either a dark brown, a dark green, maybe even some stripes associated with it, but this is the first one that's characterized as having pure black color on there. And they also noticed that it was completely splattered with thick mud, perhaps as a means to cool itself down. I don't know on that part. And it also had apparently large, coarse, gray-black bristles, like those of a wild boar, is how they described it, which is interesting as well, because here they are describing a dinosaur that potentially has some fur-like fur on it. That's still up for debate between the theory of dinosaurs and how they looked and how they existed. There's those that state that yes, the dinosaurs did have fur, they did have bristles associated with them because of the association with birds nowadays. And then there are those that that the more reptile-oriented, pure, featherless-like skin. So that's up for debate. But here they are stating that they saw gray, black-like bristles like a boar at a time when it wasn't common at that time to associate dinosaurs with any type of feathers or any type of fur. And then they also saw that it had a hideous mass of blood and saliva oozing from its jaws. And then that's when they noticed its most distinctive feature, which was that rhino-like horn perched atop its snout, which again led it to the association of it being a ceratosaurus rather than just, say, a T-Rex on there. So apparently there was this, again, standoff between them. And the dinosaur knew that it was there, knew that they were there, and they knew that it was there as well. And apparently the dinosaur just left at that point. But before it did so, it apparently reared up on its hind legs and then roared at them, one like an ear-splitting roar, and then it just disappeared back into its area, which was apparently near a ravine of some sort, with just some single huge leaps on there. And the way that they saw this thing leap, they estimated that it was going pretty fast, like at a running distance. Let's say it was far faster than any other animal they've ever seen at that time. But that's what happened. They met the dinosaur. It met them. It let them know, apparently, that it did not like that they were hunting it. And then it gave them the scare of its life by having one last gigantic roar, and then that was it on there. So that was the encounter, again, that was associated with the first encounter. Apparently there was a second one on there. It actually had to do with the same hunter on there that was within that party. The guy that was part of that group was Pierre Lavagnew, was his name on there. I think it was George Dupuy, but I can't. Some of the stories say it was Dupuy, and then others say it was another guy named Lavagnew. But either way, whoever it was, they decided that once was not enough, and so they went back. Whoever this person was went back 4 years later, in 1907, potentially 1908, depending on the research you're doing again on this. And when they went back, they decided to try to track the same area, the same exact Partridge Creek area, to try to find this creature. And sure enough, this person found it, and it was almost like, again, a Jurassic Park-like experience. Remember that that scene in the movie whenever the T-Rex comes out of the forest and starts eating one of those, I think it was called a Gallimimus, one of those ostrich-looking dinosaurs, and from a distance, the trio of the main hero and then the two kids, the boy and the girl, they watch from a distance as it eats them. Well, this guy saw this as well. He claimed that during this period he was trying to track this creature, and then all of a sudden he saw this creature. It was in the distance, but the creature was paying no interest to it at all, because at that time in its jaws it actually had a caribou, and it was apparently the caribou was long, of course, dead, because it was already in its jaws, and it was apparently taking this caribou back to some place so that way it could eat it, whether it had like its own nest of some sort or some kind of dwelling of some sort. That's what it was doing. But whenever the hunter here, whether it was Lavenu or whether it was Dupuy, when they decided to track it just temporarily, just to make sure that it was the same one, and sure enough, it was the same tracks left that were identical than the ones that he saw about 4 or 5 years earlier on there. But that was it. Wisely this time, he decided not to track it any further, but that was the second sighting associated with it, and then that's when he called it quits on there. So, but those are the only two observable occurrences with regards to this creature. Again, you had a first time, it was sometime in 1903, where a trio of hunters saw this particular creature, and then they had a second mini encounter with it a couple of days later, and then you had the second encounter a couple of years later with one of those same hunters, but they saw it again from a distance, and then that was it. So no other further sightings. If anyone knows any other particular sighting associated with the Partridge Creek Monster, or the Partridge Creek Beast as it's also called, please post your comments, share them below. Again, it's supposed to be somewhere in the Canadian area, maybe in the Alaskan area, which gives it so many unique characteristics because of the cold area that is there, and that would also make it a unique circumstance of maybe being not only one of the last living dinosaurs and last living carnivores out there, but it could be one of the few that is again fully covered in fur, to ensure that because of the cold area there, it is able to survive on there. So if anyone has any particular tales associated, hopefully within a nearby time period, then please post them below, share them below. It'll be fascinating to see what's going on. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.